You know, it's probably one of the greatest, most enduring maritime mysteries of all time. Picture this. A ship is found sailing in the middle of the Atlantic. It's in perfectly good shape, under partial sail, but there's not a single soul on board. It's an absolutely haunting story, so let's dive into the strange case of the Mary Celeste.
And that's really the core question, isn't it? The one that stumped historians and mystery lovers for like 150 years. I mean, think about it. You have a highly respected captain, his wife, their little 2-year-old daughter, and a crew of 7 experienced sailors he picked himself. And they all just vanished. Poof, gone without a trace, leaving this perfectly good ship behind. So why? What could possibly have made them do that?
Okay, so the timeline here is super tight, and honestly, that just makes the whole thing even weirder. So, the Mary Celeste sets sail from New York on November 7th. Everything seems normal. The captain's last entry in the ship's log is on November 25th. And then, get this, just 10 days later, the ship is spotted, totally deserted, just drifting around the Azores. So the big question is, what on earth happened in those 10 days?
And the scene that the sailors who found her stumbled upon? It was just eerie. There were no signs of a fight. Nothing was out of place. People's personal belongings, their valuables, clothes, even a little kid's toys, all just sitting there, untouched. The ship had 6 months' worth of food and water, and its valuable cargo was perfectly safe. But, and this is the big but, the ship's only lifeboat was missing. It's like the crew left in a hurry, but not, in a total panic. It just doesn't add up.
All right, so to really get to the bottom of this, we need to take a closer look at 2 things: the ship itself and the people who were on it. And well, it turns out the Mary Celeste had a bit of a troubled past long before this final infamous voyage.
See, before she was called the Mary Celeste, her name was the Amazon. And yeah, this ship had a reputation. Right from the start, it was plagued with bad luck. On its maiden voyage, its very first captain died. After that, it was just one thing after another. Collisions with other ships, running aground in a storm. A lot of sailors were convinced the ship was just plain cursed. But the guy in charge, Captain Benjamin Briggs, he wasn't the superstitious type. He was a really well-respected sailor, a family man, and even a part owner of the ship. He brought his wife Sarah and their 2-year-old daughter Sophia along for the trip. And the crew, he handpicked them himself. Experienced guys he trusted. The point is, these were not the kind of people who would just panic or start a mutiny for no reason. Not at all.
Okay, so when the Mary Celeste was brought into port at Gibraltar, the official investigation kicked off. And the guy in charge, an attorney general named Frederick Solly Flood, well, let's just say he was immediately convinced something terrible had happened. He jumped straight to the darkest possible theories.
So, first theory on the table, mutiny. So Foley's idea was that the crew got into the cargo of alcohol, got drunk, and then murdered Captain Briggs and his family. But, this theory falls apart pretty much instantly. For one, the cargo wasn't drinking alcohol. It was industrial-grade stuff, basically poison. And maybe more importantly, the ship was neat and tidy. There was 0 signs of a struggle or any kind of violence.
Well, what about the guys who found the ship, the crew of the Dei Gratia? The next suspicion was that they killed everyone just to claim the salvage money. But again, this makes no sense. The Dei Gratia was a slower ship, and it left New York 8 days after the Mary Celeste. And come on, if you're a pirate, why would you leave behind all that valuable cargo? In the end, none of the foul play theories really line up with the facts.
So if foul play is pretty much off the table, where does that leave us? Well, this is where investigators and modern historians have turned to science. Maybe the answer isn't a crime at all. Maybe it was some kind of bizarre, terrifying, natural event that made the crew abandon ship.
Okay, so the leading scientific theory today revolves around something called an alcohol vapor explosion. Now, when you hear explosion, you're probably picturing a big fire, right? But this is different. It's not a fiery blast. It's more like a massive pressure wave, a sudden, dramatic whoosh caused by alcohol fumes igniting. And here's the crucial part. It could totally be powerful enough to blow the ship's hatches wide open without leaving any scorch marks behind.
So let's just paint a picture of how this could have happened. Step 1. A few of those alcohol barrels start to leak, filling the cargo hold with flammable fumes. Step 2. Pressure builds up. Step 3. A random spark, maybe just from 2 metal hoops on the barrels rubbing together, ignites all that vapor. Boom. You get this terrifying, loud blast that blows the hatches off. Captain Briggs, thinking the whole ship is about to go up in a real fire, makes a split-second decision. Everyone to the lifeboat, now. The plan was probably just to get a safe distance away and wait, intending to come back once it was clear.
And you know what? There's a really compelling piece of evidence that backs this up. When they finally unloaded the cargo, they found that exactly 9 of the barrels were empty. And these 9 barrels were different from the rest. They were made of red oak, which is a much more porous wood, meaning it's way more likely to leak. In fact, a modern experiment back in 2006 actually proved that this kind of non-burning explosion was totally possible.
Now that's the leading theory, but there are a few other scientific possibilities floating around. Maybe a faulty water pump combined with a navigation error made them think the ship was taking on water and sinking fast. Or maybe something really bizarre, like a small underwater earthquake, a seaquake, violently shook the ship, released the fumes, and freaked everyone out. We have a few logical sounding explanations, but the truth is, there's no smoking gun for any of them.
But hold on, the story doesn't stop with the science, because this is where things take a really wild turn. About a decade after the ship was found, the real facts of the case got completely hijacked by a work of fiction. And that fiction is what created the whole ghost ship legend that we all know today.
Yeah, back in 1884, a young ship's surgeon wrote a short story for a magazine. And that author's name might sound familiar. It was Arthur Conan Doyle, the very same guy who would later create Sherlock Holmes. He wrote this totally fictional, totally sensationalized account of what happened on the ship.
And when I say he took liberties, I mean he just made stuff up. For starters, he changed the name to the Mary Celeste with an I, and that spelling is actually more famous now than the real one. His story was all about a violent murder, and it's the source of all those famous ghost ship details you hear, like the food being found still warm on the table. It's great drama, but none of it was true.
Here's the kicker. Doyle published the story anonymously, and it was written so convincingly that the public, who were just desperate for some kind of answer to the mystery, thought it was a true account from a survivor. Newspapers started reprinting it as fact, even adding their own made-up details, like fires still burning in the kitchen. And just like that, the legend of the ghost ship completely swallowed the much stranger and much more real story.
So, whatever happened to the actual ship? And more importantly, what about the 10 people who vanished? This is where we have to leave the legend behind and come back to the real human tragedy of it all.
Well, after all that drama, the Mary Celeste kept on sailing for another 12 years or so, passed between different owners, but that cursed reputation never really went away. Her story ends not with a bang, but a whimper. In 1885, her last captain intentionally crashed her into a reef in Haiti to try and commit insurance fraud. A pretty sad, pathetic end for what became the most famous ship in the world.
And that really brings us back to the true heart of the mystery, doesn't it? The science might explain why they got off the ship, but it can't tell us what happened after. What happened to Captain Briggs, his family, and his crew out there in that tiny lifeboat in the middle of the Atlantic? Were they hit by a storm? Did the line connecting them to the ship snap? We just don't know. No trace of them or the lifeboat was ever found.
So in the end, we're left with two versions of the Mary Celeste. There's the real story, a tragic mystery about a sudden evacuation that went horribly wrong, and then there's the legend, the classic haunted ghost ship tale. After all this time, the line between them has gotten so blurry, the legend is almost as real as the history. It really makes you wonder, right? After 150 years, does that line between the real ship and the ghost ship even matter anymore, or do we just prefer the better story?